that's already in your kitchen could actually pass a test this tough.
All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping right into the wild world of cultivated meat. You know, the stuff that sounds like science fiction, but is getting closer and closer to being a dinner table fact. But here's the thing. Before any of this can land on your plate, it has to get through one of the most intense, most rigorous safety trials you can imagine for a new food. So, let's break down what that really looks like.
So that brings us to the biggest question of all, right? How on earth do you prove that a totally new kind of food is safe to eat? I mean, we're talking about meat grown from cells. This has never been done before on a commercial scale. And it's not just about, does it taste good? It's about this huge fundamental question of trust. It's a massive scientific challenge, not just for the companies making it, but for the regulators who have to sign off on it.
So for this explainer, we've got a front row seat. We get to be a fly on the wall for the whole process. We're going to follow the actual real-life regulatory journey of a company called Mission Barns and their quest to get cultivated pork fat approved. And what's so cool is that their story, which is documented in literally hundreds of pages of back and forth with regulators, gives us this incredible behind-the-scenes look at the absolute gauntlet of proof these companies have to run.
Okay. So where does it all begin? Well, the entire foundation for safety for all of this, it starts at the tiniest, most microscopic level. We're talking about the cells themselves.
Right out of the gate, the regulators put the burden of proof squarely on the company. And their first questions cut right to the chase. They're basically asking, okay, first off, prove to us that these cells are actually from a pig. And second, and this is maybe even more important, how can you guarantee us that the animal you got them from was completely healthy and totally disease-free?
And check out the level of proof they had to provide. Mission Barns came back with this multi-layered defense. First, a full vet inspection and a health certificate for the donor pig. Done. Then they screened that animal for a whole panel of viruses and bacteria. Next, they used a PCR test. Think of it like a genetic fingerprint to prove, yep, these cells are definitely porcine or sus scrofa. They even did something called karyotaping, which is basically checking to make sure the cell's chromosomes stay stable and don't go haywire. And as if that wasn't enough, the whole factory is a pig cell-only zone. No other species allowed, period. Just to rule out any chance of cross-contamination. Okay, so the cells are clean, they're verified, they're good to go, but now you've got to grow them. You have to turn those few cells into an actual food product. And that brings up the next massive challenge. How do you scale this up and keep everything perfectly, absolutely sterile?
And this is where the focus shifts right to the factory floor. The regulators are asking, what's to stop some stray bacteria floating in the air, or even something from the people working there from getting into your culture? And you can see why they're worried, right? Because unlike, say, a farm, this growing environment is basically a five-star hotel for microbes. It's warm, it's nutrient-rich. If something bad gets in, it's going to love it in there.
So, Mission Barns' answer was basically to build a fortress of sterility. You can think of it like 5 shields of protection, one after another. So, shield number 1, aseptic technique. All the staff are highly trained and decked out in full PPE, gowns, masks, the works. Shield 2, the environment itself. All the work is done inside special biosafety cabinets, which are themselves inside a clean room with HEPA-filtered air. Shield 3, all the gear is sterile. The big vessels are either bought that way or steam sterilized on site at super high temperatures. Shield 4, the media. Every single liquid that feeds the cells gets passed through these tiny 0.2 micron filters to strip out any microbes. And finally, Shield 5. They're always watching. A comprehensive monitoring program is constantly testing the air, the surfaces, everything, to make sure that sterile bubble is never, ever breached.
But, just having a general plan wasn't quite enough. The regulators zoomed in even further. They picked a very specific, very common threat, Staphylococcus aureus. You probably know it as staph. It's a bacteria that lots of people carry, and the regulators wanted to know exactly what the company was doing to control for that one specific risk.
And this is a perfect example of that regulatory back and forth in action. So Mission Barns' initial plan was to use a general test for microbes, but the regulators pushed back. They said, nope, that's not specific enough. We're worried about Staph aureus, and your test might miss it. So what did Mission Barnes do? In direct response to that feedback, they went back and added a specific test just for S. aureus to their official release criteria for every single batch.
So after all that, after putting all those controls in place, after adding that very specific new test that the regulators asked for, you might be wondering, how many times did they actually find it? How many times did Staphylococcus aureus show up? Well, after more than a year of nonstop monitoring, the answer is a big fat 0. Not a single time.
And look, the proof is right here in the data. These are the official certificates of analysis. Think of them like the final report card for each batch. And what you're seeing is data from 12 different production runs. And in every single one, the result for S. aureus was less than 10 per gram, which is basically code for we couldn't find any. This is the level of proof we're talking about. It's not just theory, it's real, hard data, batch after batch after batch.
All right, so with the microbial safety pretty much nailed down, you'd think they'd be done, right? Nope. The scrutiny just went deeper. We're moving from the world of microbes down to the world of molecules. The regulators started examining every single ingredient that goes into the soup the cells grow in and everything that makes up the final product.
And here's something pretty remarkable. Sometimes a question from a regulator doesn't just check a box for safety, it can actually make the final product better. And that's exactly what we see here in this little story about trans fats. It all started when they started looking really closely at the fatty acid profile.
So just look at this data. It shows a crystal clear pivot. In the initial batches, you can see the product had about 3.5% L-lactic acid, which is a trans fat. When the regulators flagged this, the company did some digging and traced it back to a lipid mix they were buying from a third-party supplier. So they switched. They developed their own in-house formula. And what was the result? Bam! The trans fat level plummeted down to just 0.7%. And as a bonus, the amount of good fat, oleic acid, shot way up. That is a direct product improvement driven entirely by this regulatory conversation.
So the regulators kept digging. They asked about another, less common fatty acid called nervonic acid. And this is a great example of how you answer these kinds of questions. The company put it into context. They showed that a serving of their fat would have about 12.9 milligrams. So what does that mean? Well, it's about the same amount you'd get in some yellow mustard, and it's way, way less than what you'd find in a piece of king salmon. It's all about providing that perspective. The safety deep dive didn't stop there. It also got into trace metals like nickel, vanadium, and molybdenum. Now, these were being used in absolutely tiny amounts to help the cells grow, but they aren't things you normally think of as food additives. So for every single one of them, Mission Barnes had to build a brand new, comprehensive safety case, basically from scratch. And how did they prove it was safe? Well, they did the math. They calculated exactly how much of these metals someone might consume. For example, for molybdenum, they showed that the absolute maximum intake you could get from their product was less than 0.1%. That's less than 0.1% of the official safe daily limit set by health authorities. The exposure was just so incredibly tiny that it couldn't possibly pose a risk.
And that brings us to the final stage of this gauntlet, the moment of truth, really. Looking at the finished product itself. So after all this, how does this new cultivated fat actually stack up against the conventional pork fat it's meant to replace?
Well, when you look at the final numbers, the difference is pretty striking. Conventional pork fat is, exactly what it sounds like. It's mostly fat, anywhere from 52 to 94%. But whoa, look at the Mission Barnes product. It's mostly water, almost 89%, with only about 5% fat. The protein is pretty similar, but otherwise, this is a fundamentally different product.
So, to answer the question, is it the same as pork fat? The answer is a clear and simple no. But really, that was never the point. The goal wasn't to create an identical twin, it was to prove that what they did create was safe. And they have. It's got way more moisture, way less fat, similar protein and minerals, and as we saw, way less of the bad trans fats. Its entire composition has been picked apart, questioned, and justified every step of the way.
So at the end of the day, after years of this intense back and forth, all the questions, all the analysis, all the little adjustments, what you're left with is a mountain of evidence, a complete and comprehensive safety dossier that documents every cell, every ingredient, and every single step of the process, all to prove one thing, that this brand new food is safe to eat.
And all of this leaves us with one last kind of provocative thought. The level of scrutiny we've just walked through, it's astronomical. It's so far beyond what any conventional food has ever had to go through. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If this is the new bar for food innovation, what else that's already in your kitchen could actually pass a test this tough?